All right. So good morning, everyone. We are going to get started with our Sabbath school lesson. We're going to get started our Sabbath school lesson review, and we are still. Let me check YouTube to make sure that we are streaming there. Okay, I don't have a visual yet. Okay, but the audio is good. All right, so let's go ahead and open up with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this Sabbath day that you have blessed us with and for allowing us to again come into your house to fellowship with one another and to congregate. I ask that you would please be with us at this time as we conduct our Sabbath school lesson review, and that you would be with those who are here present and also those who are joining us online. Thank you for this opportunity. These things I ask in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, so welcome everyone. Welcome those who are watching remotely. We are continuing our lesson study of the book of Genesis. We're looking at lesson 4 this week, where we were addressing the flood. And and as we get to our memory text for that lesson, our memory text is taken from Matthew chapter 24, verses 37, and that read as, "But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be." And that's coming from Jesus. In Matthew chapter 24, we know that, that's a very well-known chapter that discusses the prophecies surrounding the last day events, which we should be expecting, what we should be looking for, as far as, events that would be current events and worldwide events that would be taking place as signs of Jesus' second coming or soon return. And so amidst the list of things that Jesus is sharing as what will happen as signs of his soon return, he makes mention in verse 37 of Matthew 24 that the time and the age that will surround the time of his second coming is going to be very similar or identical to what was happening when when Noah was building the ark for the flood. And so essentially what God is saying, or Jesus is explaining, is that history will repeat itself, just as what we saw happen with Noah, which drove God to destroy everything and start new, in a sense, is going to be the same thing that's going to happen again. And as we get into the different aspects of the story of the flood this week, we went over the preparation, the event of the flood, the end of the flood, and the following covenants after the flood that took place. We can kind of start to see, actually it's not even difficult to see, it's actually pretty easy to see that that history has already repeated itself and that we are basically in the same place again. So anyway, as we get into our the introduction from Sabbath afternoon, what the lesson starts off by looking at or addressing is the wickedness of man, because that's where it started from. We've been looking at we started lesson one started with the creation, and what was God saying as he was going through the creation. Every day he was doing something, and he said that it was good. And so by day 7, when he's resting on the completion of him speaking, him forming man, him commanding man to have dominion over the earth and to be a steward of the creation. And all of it is good. And then by the time we get to the flood, which takes place in Genesis chapter 6, which is, if you look at the genealogies, you understand that it's about a few thousand, like about 1,000 to 2,000 years after the end of creation. The earth has gotten to a point due to the wickedness of man. Earth has gotten to a point where God has to destroy everything. Exactly. And so we're talking about, we're addressing the wickedness of man, and as the lesson points out, God's response to wickedness had two sides. The two sides of God's response to wickedness, we understand he has the side of justice, where wickedness and evil cannot stand. But what's the other side of God's response? It's also salvation. How is it also salvation? Well, if it was to be completely just, if it was going to be completely justice, getting rid of all signs of wickedness and evil, then he would have gotten rid of Noah and his family as well. Because Noah and his family, they are human, and we know that they have sin as well, because we even know that from the writings of Paul, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. We also know that what Jesus said is that when they said, "Good teacher," and he said, "Why do you call me good? There is no one that is good." And Paul also addresses that again as well. For he says, "There is none good, for all have sinned." And so we know that Noah has sinned as well, just like we have sinned, but yet there's salvation for us. And so we know that there's going to be justice, but then we also know that on the flip side, even though there will be justice, that there is still an opportunity for salvation. And so in, I guess, kind of foreshadowing our situation, Noah was given an opportunity for salvation as well, and salvation in the form of an ark. And just for your own reference, in Genesis chapter 6 and then Genesis chapter 7. And we are very familiar with what Noah had to do in order to prepare for the flood. But the lesson made an emphasis. Well, let me back up. We knew what Noah had to do. What Noah had to do in order to prepare for the flood was build an ark. And that ark took about approximately 120 years for him to build. And so, we know the story basically that, the ark was built, the animals came, everyone loaded up into the ark, and then the waters came. But the lesson has us pause and just look at the aspect of the ark. Because it is through the ark that the ark is the vessel through which Noah and his family have salvation from the destruction. And so the lesson highlights this ark and looks at its implications and basically what it symbolizes and what also parallels to it. And so the first thing that the lesson talks about is that the great structure of the ark parallels to the ark of the tabernacle, the ark of the covenant. Just as the ark of the flood will permit the survival of humankind, so the ark of the covenant, a sign of God's presence in the midst of his people, points to God's work of salvation for his people. So, but if we look at the story of it's kind of, you kind of do see the parallels, because when you look at the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Covenant was where the Ten Commandments were kept. That's where you had the Shekinah glory. You had two angels over. A bowl of manna was in there. You also had Aaron's rod of wood that budded. And so you had those items inside the ark, and it was the most holy, I guess, structure in the possession of God's people, as it was placed in the most holy place, which could only be visited by the high priest at a specific time in the year. And so what we're seeing is that but yet we know from the book of Exodus that this holy thing, which God's presence is in, and also the key artifacts of his relationship with his people, Ten Commandments, the bowl of manna and whatnot, the ark was built by the hands of men. And yet we also see the ark that Noah built was built by the hands of men. And so that what the lesson is bringing out and helping us to understand is that the two aspects, we talked about justice, but when we look at salvation, we understand that looking at the Ark of the Covenant, looking at the ark that Noah built, we see that we have a part to play in our own salvation as well. Our salvation is not autonomous. It is not something that God is just going to do and we're going to sit back and allow it to happen. There's a part that each one of us has to play, because if the children of Israel did not build the ark in the the Ark of the Covenant in the correct manner, God would not have been pleased and God would not have inhabited it. If Noah did not build the ark because he didn't believe, then him and his family would not have been saved. All would have been lost, exactly. And so we can see already the first action that is required as a part of our participation in salvation is obedience. God has given a command, and of course God is not asking us to, go out and build some type of structure, but we have to reflect in our own lives and ask, like, what has God called us to do? And as you see with, like, for example, when you see like Noah, he obeyed, he built the ark, and because he built it, it was him and his family was saved. So it wasn't just Noah, and also he provided a place of shelter for specific animals to be saved as well. And so when we take up our own cross and participate in our salvation where God is calling us to, and in obedience, our obedience and what we do can also have a benefit to other people, so that other people can be saved as well. And so, but we are still looking at the preparation. And so, we're kind of like, I could say that we're even in a time of preparation ourselves, right? Because we know that the end is coming, just like Noah knew that the flood was coming. And so this is so what we see on Sundays is something that we can actually very much relate to. There was one last paragraph at the very end, which I feel like is very important for us to make mention of. It says, in short, though Noah found grace in the eyes of God, and that comes from Genesis chapter 6, verse 8. And when we read that, that's a very important verse. It's a very short statement. And that Noah found grace in the eyes of God. And why that's important is because that just shows us that Noah didn't do anything to deserve his salvation. He didn't, it wasn't because he was some great man, some great leader, because we don't know the complete story about what was happening in that time as far as who God was talking to, who he wasn't talking to. We do know, like, Enoch lived before Noah. We do know, like, Adam was there before Noah, and he died before the flood. But what we do know is that when God came to Noah, Noah listened and Noah obeyed. God could have also came to other people, but we don't know that he came to other people. It was 120 years over which that he had to prepare And so, Noah had to have friends. Noah had to have people coming to see that he was building an ark, people that were inquiring. But at the end of the day, regardless of who was interested, regardless of who came by, regardless of whoever else God talked to, it was only 8 people that were saved. And so we have to, in our preparation for Jesus' second coming, in our preparation for um, I guess the flood, the judgment of all wickedness. That's something that we're very much looking forward to. But we also have to understand that if it's just a small number of us that are saved, that are doing the work, that are doing the actual work of preparation, then that's okay. Because it was just Noah and his family. And sometimes a lot of times, as church leaders or as people, going to work, you can feel really lonely to be the only people that seem to care about being obedient to God and doing what God has called us to do. But that's okay, because just as God was with Noah, he's with us too in that moment of preparation. So we look at there's only so much time for preparation, right? Preparation eventually ends, and then the event comes. And so we get to the event on, let me just make sure. Oh, okay. Before I move on, okay. There was one point. There was an important discussion point that I wanted to bring out from Sunday. Sorry about that. So again, we're talking about how we're in the moment of preparation, and how it was Noah living in a world full of wicked people. We're also in a world living with wicked people. And so what I wanted to pose as you can either think about it, you can respond, however you feel compelled, please do so. I wanted to ask, let me see. What should our responsibility be in our time when we dwell with the wicked? So, there's going to be wickedness everywhere we go. We have a responsibility to share the gospel, to warn other people about Jesus' second coming. But we also have a duty to protect ourselves spiritually. And so how do we find a balance in reaching out to sinners? Now let me rephrase that, sorry about that. Not reaching out to sinners, because we're all sinners. Reaching out to those who do not know about Jesus and have not made that commitment for him, but also protecting ourselves. How do we find that balance, Sister Valerie? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Exactly. Right. No, exactly. And um, to your point, Otto Webster, that is a very critical point that why I really wanted us to go back on this is because there's only so much that we can do, and I feel like we as Christians, we put such a high level of expectations on ourselves to go out and win souls. We are supposed to go out and we're supposed to go out and share what our belief and our faith, but just bec- just because no one accepts, because no one listens or no one comes, that doesn't mean that we failed our mission. And so a lot of times it can be confusing and it can be discouraging, and we can feel like we failed our job if no one comes. But our job was just to go and share the message. Mm-hmm.
Following the ark
Right.
flow, you understand that Noah took 120 years to try to get other people to accept Christ.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, instead of people going in, God put in animals.
Right.
Because the people didn't accept him.
Right.
So we can only, like you said, we can only do so much. But the main thing is that we keep all focused, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Not because Noah, as I said, he was an old man by the time it was finished,
Right.
but God saved him.
Exactly. And so now we can transition to the actual event of the flood. And I think as I was going over this lesson, I realized that we actually talked about Noah and the flood, like during the actual pandemic. I remember talking about it. But this time when we talk about the flood, the lesson makes the parallels to creation. And I thought this was actually very interesting. I didn't even make this connection. It may not be significant to you all, but so when we look at the story of creation, one of the first actions that God does is God divides the waters, because the earth is described in Genesis chapter 1, it was without form and it was void, and it says that the Spirit of God moved over the face of the deep being the water. So it was basically a ball of a shapeless water, and what you're seeing is how God is dividing the waters, putting them up and then bringing them low, and then he's pushing them aside and he's bringing forth dry land. And so what the lesson is talking about is how the flood was the undoing of all that. So during the creation, he separated and divided the waters. We have dry land where we can inhabit. And then during the flood, he brought all those waters back together and covered everything up. And you see, and then also in a similar action to, we're making not also parallels to creation, but also parallels to the event that we're preparing ourselves for. It says this process of bringing the waters back together to destroy everything conveys a paradoxical message. God has to destroy what is before in order to allow for new creation afterward. The creation of the new earth requires the destruction of the old one. And so what we're looking forward to is Jesus' second coming, but we know what's coming along with that. We know that that's coming along with that. It's going to be the destruction of sin and everything that sin has caused, the disease, the violence, the corrupt character, and for the first time since Adam and Eve, order and balance will be restored. Righteousness will be restored, and that's what we're really looking forward to. We're not looking forward to people dying. We're looking forward to God's kingdom being restored. Yes, a peaceful place, exactly. But I wanted for us to take some time and to meditate on this idea that God has to destroy what is before in order to allow new creation to allow for new creation afterward. If we I don't remember the verse. It's going to take too much time. But I want us to think about it in our own personal lives. That's why I want us to take this. So I want us to, it's not for us to share, here. I just want us to think about what is it, the verse in the New Testament. I cannot remember the text. I apologize, but it eventually says that how we are supposed to be new creatures, how old things are supposed to pass away, and all things are supposed to be made new. And so that process starts here on earth about being made a new creature. And so I want us to, what we need to do as Christians is that we need to be asking God to help us to recognize what needs to be destroyed in our lives so that we can be that new creation. Of course, we know that we're going to get a new body once we go to heaven, but where I'm talking about a character on an inner base, what has to be destroyed, because we tend to, as we go through life, we have our various experiences, positive and negative, and they shape us. What does David say? I was born in iniquity, and I was shapen by it as well. And so, if we, as you said, Elder Webster, if we, we're supposed to go with God, but the times that we don't go with God, we get corruptly shapen. But we cannot be saved like that. We have to allow God to destroy and break us down in the way that He sees fit, and allow that to happen so that we can become the new creation. And so how do we allow God to break us down? Because it doesn't feel good, and a lot of times we resist it, but how do we get to the point where we're allowing Him to do that for us? Oh, 2 Corinthians? Okay, cool. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 17. Yeah, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17, it says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. Right. Thank you, Courtney, for sharing that with us. And so, so the lesson had asked, the lesson at the end of Monday had asked, what in us needs to be destroyed in order to be created new? And so that has to be a daily process. Mm-hmm. Sister Valerie? Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And, you know, I think it's in John chapter 15, when Jesus talks about how He is the true vine. And also, I think it's in Isaiah chapter 5. It's either Isaiah chapter 5 or Jeremiah chapter 5, where He talks about how He's also the vine dresser, and about how the whole pruning process. And, for those of us who are green thumb.
So much that we don't even take it.
Mm-hmm.
It is. And the point is, when you gradually, little things chip away at your life towards Christ, you become much more strong.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? That's where pruning comes in. Oh, I've accepted Christ as my personal Savior from sin. I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. You can't do it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
You have to let Christ prune you so that you can step up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. No, exactly. Mm. 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 And I like that verse too because, you know, that verse is the that verse about how he draws closer to us when we draw close to him. I like that because that's it's a two-way street. Yeah, you kind of see God is promising a response. If you come to me, I'll come to you. So that's not me having to go all the way. He's going to meet us. Exactly, exactly. And that's such a powerful verse. And so, you know, what excuse do we have? We have all the tools. You know, he's been willing from the beginning. And so, you know, we basically have the flood that has to happen in our own lives to save us for the flood that's going to be coming at the end of time. And we don't want to be, we don't want to be swept away. No. And so when we get to Tuesday, we look at the end of the flood, and everything that it brings. We go to Genesis chapter 8, verse 1. The lesson addresses a word in that specific verse. It says, "Then God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind pass over the earth and the water subsided." What the lesson is focusing on here is that word remembered. What does it mean when it says God remembered Noah? Mm. Mm-hmm. The importance of that, you know, what it reminded me of is just how faithful God is. Because look at this. God has the entire earth. He has all of creation. Millions of people have already been washed away. How hard would it have been just to, you know, wash away the ark as well, and to wash away Noah? It would have been it would have been easier than what he had done before. But and if he had done that, he could have started afresh. He could have forgotten about sin. He could have made a brand new creation, a brand new man. But he decided to stick with man because this is what was so powerful to me, because the flood washed away all the wicked people that would not get onto the ark, did not believe, had no faith. And God knew what sin was going to do. He knew how powerful sin was. He knew how devastating it was, because essentially what sin is the absence of God. It's everything that's it's ungod. It's everything that isn't God. And so God knows everything he is, and he knows how good he is. And so he knew how terrible sin was. He knew that it was going to lead to Jesus' crucifixion, because that was the plan that was a redemptive plan. And it just, how tempting, like, I know for myself, like, how tempted I would have been, you know, everything he could have avoided had he just killed Noah right there. All the pain, all the suffering, the genocides, the wars, the famines, you know, Jesus dying. He could have, you know, but he stuck with the plan. He stuck with the plan, and he stayed committed to his word to us. And I thought that was very powerful. just about that the fact that he remembered he remembered Noah and how he was just so willing to stick to the plan and it just spoke to just how faithful God is.
And look at the famous prophet
Yeah, yeah.
that's so powerful. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and created the flood,
Mm-hmm.
right? But at the end, God just caused a wind to pass over,
Mm-hmm.
and the water stopped to flood. That shows how powerful God is.
Yeah.
And the other point is that God, even in the ark, God kept Noah. That's the main thing.
Right.
Because Noah didn't forget God, and God didn't forget Noah. So he was, they say, he was in the ark with him. You know, that's a strength. Because if you have dedicated your life to God,
Mm-hmm.
God is going to be with you.
Right. Sister Valerie. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Gideon. Right. Mm-hmm. No, I think sometimes also that um, we I sometimes I don't think that we give, I don't want to say give God credit, but properly understand his relationship with us as far as how we are his children and how he is a father to us. But I think a lot of times we look at that relationship and we we see ourselves as the grown children with a certain level of we have a certain level of expectation. Like we think that God expects so much from us, but um, but like think about you as a parent. Like when your child is learning how to walk, you know, the child, it's going to be a moment where they fall down. Are you going to get upset when the child falls down? And but they're strengthening their leg muscles. Their body is learning balance, and as we are, God is fully aware of where we are more than we understand ourselves, and so He's not going to get upset if we take a misstep in faith. You know, exactly. Right. Remember the parable of the talents, um, where the man gives out, the man is going away and he gives his servants a certain amount of money, and one of them buries it and the other man goes out and doubles it, the other man triples it, and he comes back and and he gets a report. And what does he say to the man who didn't do anything with it? He says, "It would have been better for you to have tried to do something and lose it than for you to do nothing." And so, exactly. And so, I understand what you're saying, Courtney, because I've gone through that myself. But I also know that God, God would prefer that we take a misstep than to take no step. And that's not to go against being still and know that He is God. But I think that sometimes that being still is a is an inner stillness. Not sometimes it's physical stillness, but sometimes it's just being in an inner stillness, and when you're not freaking out, and knowing knowing God means being still and knowing that He is God is also knowing that if we take a misstep, He can correct us in love and not mess up the plan, the grand plan. Yeah, Sister Valerie. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. As we bring our lesson today to a conclusion, we end by looking at the covenant that is established after the flood. Um, and so we see what Noah's response is after he gets out of the ark. And Noah's response is that he worships God. He offers this. He builds an altar. It was like the first altar mentioned in the Bible that he built, and he offered a sacrifice of thanksgiving on it for God's for God's faithfulness and for God's salvation. And then we also look at the covenant the covenant that God makes not just with Noah but with the whole of creation. And what is that covenant? That covenant takes place in chapter 8, and I think in the beginning of chapter 9. Yeah, it's chapter 8 verses chapter 9 verse 20. Yeah. Right. So, yeah. Go ahead. Right. No, and that's but Sister Valerie, we also have in Romans chapter 1, Paul explains, you know, how man has used wisdom and God's nature. God's nature is intended to testify of him, bring us closer to him. But man has used that and the science, the study of the nature, to turn away from God and to discredit everything that God has done. But what we also see in Genesis chapter in the covenant, God is saying we understand, yes, God said that He's never going to flood the earth or destroy the earth with flood waters again. But the one thing that He says is that I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, nor will I again destroy everything as I have done. So I think that's so we pay attention to never destroying, but He's never going to curse the ground again. And I think that's very powerful because we never really, at least I've never really thought about it. I never thought like without that covenant, God could have cursed the ground again. Like we never really thought that was an option, but he said He was never going to do it again. So I thought that's kind of, I don't know what other way He could have cursed the ground afterward, but we know that He cursed the ground in a way where we have to work for our food and farm and whatnot. Yeah, He said that, yes. It's in verse 21. Right, exactly. And then He said in verse 22, He said, while the earth remains, and this is in chapter 8, verse 22, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. So He's promising to keep the cycles going. And we know how important that is when we have daylight saving time, how it messes up our sleeping, our sleep. We know the importance of, and what seed time and harvest, we kind of take that for granted because of the systems that we have in place. But I mean, we do see it when we have a bad crop, the prices go up. And back then it was a whole famine, and so they had to have storehouses to prevent against that. But those are just like moments in time when there's no harvest. There's just moments in time, but God's saying that He's going to keep, that same consistency. Just like how we know once October comes, the leaves are going to start to fall. And and I don't know, I think like the consistency that we have in our life is due to God's faithfulness. The fact that we can expect snow in New York or Michigan in January, that points to God's covenant right here. I think that's really, I think it's a sign that it's a sign that we don't give God enough credit for even the very little things. We walk around a lot of times feeling like, oh, God is, God, where are you? Well, I'm in the snow underneath your feet. The fact that it's here rather than, sweltering sun in December, except like if you're in Florida, but like sweltering sun in December, that's a testament. I'm here. Sister Valerie, I'll take care. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Right. No, that's a very true point. But with that, we're going to wrap up our Sabbath school lesson for this for this morning. I think next week we are probably in the Tower of Babel. I want to say. Yep, all nations in Babel. So that'll be lesson number 5. So with that, let us just close out with a word of prayer, and then we'll transition to the next part of our service. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this time that we've been able to study your word and for allowing us to be in your presence, for the community and for the discussion that we've been able to have. And I ask, Lord, that as we continue in our lives, Lord, that we would allow you to do the breaking down in ourselves that it needs to happen so that you can build us into the new creation that we need to be. I ask that you would be with us in this preparation time, that we would be as faithful as Noah was to the call that you have given to each one of us, and to the commission that you've put on into each one of our lives, and the purpose that we've been given this life. And I ask, Lord, that we would also grow in our relationship with you, so that we know how and where and when it is appropriate, and how best to test you, and to understand how our relationship with you and faith and trust works, And I ask that you continue to be with us throughout the Sabbath day, and that you would please bless and find acceptable the rest of our worship program. These things I ask in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.